What's up, guys? This episode of the podcast is brought to you by HD Muscle. HD Muscle is more than a supplement company. They are a team of like-minded individuals who have come together to create a truly superior product line with zero compromises. In order to create the world's most premium supplement brand that is synonymous with today's top-level bodybuilders, athletes, and rising stars, HD Muscle had to step outside the normal parameters and practices of the industry. No limitations are placed on research or innovation when creating their superior product line. HD Muscle works with the most talented formulators and experts in the industry who share their core values, beliefs, and vision to create a line of products that can truly help you to push yourself past your limits and achieve your true potential. HD Muscle refuses to cut corners or limit their creativity based on monetary restrictions. HD Muscle will never sacrifice results for profit or promote an inadequate product. Integrity is everything. For free shipping right now on orders over $99, head over to www.hdmuscle.com and use the discount code HELLRUNE at the checkout. To stay updated on the latest news and releases from HD Muscle, follow at hd.muscle on Instagram. This episode is also brought to you by Stay Classy Meats to help make it easier and more affordable to gain access to high-quality meats direct to your door. Stay Classy Meats are a small batch supplier of high-quality meats from Montana. They have a strong inventory and are committed to quickly turning orders around to keep your freezer stocked. Stay Classy Meats have adjusted internal operations to serve you more efficiently during this difficult time. This means packing orders daily and shipping out on Mondays and Tuesdays. I'm proud to stand behind this company and offer a viable alternative to ravaged grocery stores and huge lineups. Head on over to www.stayclassymeats.com and use the discount code HELLRUNE at the checkout to save 10% off your entire order. Stay healthy, stay safe. My guest today is an Irish musician best known for his vocal duties in the black metal band Primordial. He has spent the last 30 years touring the world and performing for thousands of metal fans from all walks of life. He is the host of Agitators Anonymous podcast, works for one of the biggest metal labels in the world, Metal Blade Records, and I very much enjoyed our conversation. Give it up for Alan Averill. And 3, 2, 1. Alan, Lord of Darkness, Speaker of Truths. Thanks for coming on to the podcast, my friend.
Lord, that's very... a lot of blue blood in the black metal scene back in the day, you know. Lots of lords and counts and earls. And, yeah, I'm all right. How are you? What's going on?
I'm doing good. I'm just adjusting to this life in quarantine. It's been pretty crazy, you know. Sometimes it feels like we're living in a movie. I don't know, how has this experience been for you? What has anything changed drastically, or how are you kind of dealing with this new way of life that we have to cope with temporarily?
I mean, first of all, when I heard about what, you know, with the first moments you hear about the what the virus was or its potentiality, I, like most people, kind of went, you know, that's something we only hear about in other continents or other countries. And then slowly it became more serious. But it's really, really strange in that I think that we're asked to participate in something remotely. So basically what they're doing is quarantining the healthy. So I think that it's very weird. It's like you're being asked to participate in something by not participating, and it's almost antithetical to most of our instincts of human nature, you know. And so it's very weird. I mean, everything I'm digesting about information from other countries is through the screen, but yet day to day, this bubble of life is, the weather is fine, the streets are empty, I just go running, and it's a very difficult circle to square, you know, that you're in the middle of something so potentially dramatically meaningful in the timeline of world history. But what part are you playing in it? Well, mainly I just ran around in a 5-kilometer radius. I don't know, you know.
Yeah, it's very strange, and it's kind of like what you said. And I had a moment like this that was pretty profound, and probably like the first week that all of this stuff was kind of starting to ramp up, and it reached North America, and everyone was really panicking, and you could see that. And, you know, obviously the panic is exaggerated online, because, you know, it's just, you get peppered with these constant reshares of good media, bad media, and just pure garbage that people have basically YouTubed and then shared on there. So it became very stressful very quickly. And I was catching myself, you know, I caught myself basically just getting sucked into the vortex of updates and news. And it started to make me very, very stressed out. I was getting almost like, I caught myself just wasting hours flipping through this stuff. I was like, oh my God, I need to put this shit down, because, and then I went for a hike with my father, and to my disbelief, which the internet would probably tell me otherwise, the sky was not falling when I got out there. It's very bizarre, because we're almost kind of looking at this through the lens of obviously technology, but with the overexposure and like you said, the lack of physical and personal interaction with other people, I feel like it's really affecting our perception of the reality of the situation.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of made peace with the fact that I know that I don't know, and that even my friends who are, let's say, I always think of things in gradations of percentages. I try and be rational and empirical about analyzing what I do and do not know, and try and be emotionally divorced from most things like this. And like, not to, as you say, believe the sky is falling or whatever else. But even I had to sort of like how can we say? You have to sort of realize that even the YouTubers that you might find your algorithm aligned with, that are being sent for you to take in and absorb, those themselves are curated based on your own internal biases to some degree anyway. And I mean, as I keep saying to people, is like, moderate man says reasonable thing. No one views that. No one looks at that. So even things that are being said by people you might fundamentally agree with, in the realms of opinion pieces like YouTubers or whatever, I've sort of kind of cut them out, much to the, let's say, cause many arguments amongst friends of mine who are more inclined to believe that those are the last bastions of like maverick journalism or something. I'm more inclined to kind of go, okay, I want to hear from the nerdy virologist with no agenda. And, you know, I think we have to put it into historical context of, you know, typhoid and cholera and all these other pandemics, and at least give it some historical context, because if it has historical context, then, you know, the idea that this is a biological weapon made by, you know, China, which then veers into all this 5G conspiracy for some people, and you're kind of going, okay, look, you know, in the 20th century we got rid of polio through vaccination. You know, just simple statements like that, place it in a historical timeline. I think it's very, because we're being asked to kind of isolate and only take in information via our screen. Obviously, people are just sitting in front of the screens all day and all night, and they're not able to congregate and discuss any of this, you know. So it's I've kind of made peace with admitting kind of that I haven't reached a fulsome conclusion about it yet. You know, I think it's impossible. You know, so I've been very last week very adamant about not taking absolutist standpoints. You know, and trying to eschew the sort of fatalism that's involved in that. You know, if that makes
that's pretty much like where I've come to is just because, and part of it is that I don't know what information I'm supposed to be believing. You know, we've got all these people out there that are challenging experts. But then we also have media that is providing us with information that is very difficult to trust. And we also have politicians that are deciding how we approach this virus and how we're going to fight this virus. And they're filled with different agendas too as well. You know, I'm not quite sure what the experience has been like for you, but here in Canada, you know, there's all kinds of things that are being introduced that are kind of like, hold on a second, this doesn't really make sense. And so it's just, I think it's really hard for people to decide what they're supposed to absorb. So I've been observing what's being put out there, but I reached a certain point this week where I'm kind of just like, fuck all of this, because none of the information I'm getting is consistent, and it starts to become very stressful when you become that YouTube researcher, because you really want to get to the bottom of what's going on here, so you know how to approach it without anxiety. Because this is, you know, it's that classic case of, you know, chaos to order, and things are in chaos right now, and we can't put things into order because we don't even know what to trust at this point in time. You know, it's just become so muddy, the information that's being put out there.
I mean, I'm not one of these people I'm not one of these people that believe there is I think it's human nature to try and find an overarching narrative to everything. I think it's part of our sort of hunter-gatherer past or whatever, you know, when we named the god of the forest this, or we tried to understand lightning by giving it a name or whatever. It's I personally believe that that's a kind of an almost religious inheritance, and the sense that we try and find an overarching narrative. But yet I look at our politicians and I think to myself, these are not people that are in on some vast Machiavellian plot that aren't telling the public. Now, I'm one of the, like I said, I'm one of these people I don't believe there's a room with 6 people in it deciding the fate of the world, because I think it's a mathematical improbability. If you, as you say, resign yourself to chaos to some degree, what you have to understand with that is that mathematically it's just impossible. There are the gradations of gray, which are between the sexy black and white answers that everybody wants to hear. They want the soundbite. It's all because of this. It's all because of that. And the answer is, it's actually 1,000 points of gray light between those two things as to why all of this unfolds. And I think an awful lot of it was just what happened in Italy just scared the hell out of everyone, and they just rushed to lockdown, and then realized perhaps, okay, we might have pressed this too far. And of course, people who say that the deaths are low can say, well, you know, we locked society down, and we did it too soon. But those two things are correlated, so they can kind of win either way with that argument. It's like I said, it's submitting to the fact that the cognitive dissonance of several different points of view, or 2 different points of view, being true at the same time. It can be true that the death statistics are manipulated in order to gain funding, but it can also be true that some people are dying from it. I mean, go into a care home in Ireland or whatever, and there are death statistics. So, and then you have Sweden, where they're doing herd immunity, and then other countries. I mean, what fascinates me is the countries that have done really well in, and like, we haven't had a surge here, but like Greece, Bulgaria, Poland, let's call them unfashionable countries that have just kind of like quelled the surge and come out of this on the other side, and are just kind of like about to go back to work. So I think there's a part of us has to submit to maybe this isn't the end game drama that we all thought it would be. And that's one thing I've been arguing all week with my friends and some friends of mine, is that maybe my apartment in 3 months won't be the underground silo bunker of a green vest sniper fighting off the bots of the New World Order. Maybe it's just one of those things, and people will dust themselves down, and society will get back to getting on, like it always kind of does, but with a few adjustments. I'm not naive enough to believe that there aren't agents, powerful agents, who are using what's happening to their own ends. It's not a biometric passports and under the skin surveillance are not something from the far future. They're here now, and the fact that governments will, I'm sure there are agents of governments that are going to use this as a means to bring those in, but I don't believe it's mathematically impossible for all of this to be pulling in the same direction. It just, to me, at least anyway, it just isn't. I don't know if that's a rambling answer. You go.
Yeah, no, it's kind of something that people love to do, and it's to not accept that more than one thing can be true at the same time. We like to. It's very strange. We like to think that there's only ever one answer to one thing, and then we kill each other trying to find this answer, but you never do, because it's might be all of these things that we're talking about. And like you said, with there's these other countries that are kind of getting back to normal, and then there's other countries that are not getting back to normal. And we're comparing this to all sorts of things that maybe it doesn't really make sense to compare this to the flu, right?
For sure.
When you're talking about the flu, for example, if you want to get specific, because that's kind of what the main argument has been. It's like, why are we locked down? There's the same deaths as basically a bad flu season. But when somebody gets the flu, you go to work, people look at you, you look like shit, you're sick, you're kind of within that incubation period, you go home, you're better, and we can deal with it. The thing that's, I think, scary about this is the invisible enemy aspect of this, where people can be contagious and they're not sick. And the difference between the flu and this disease is that they don't have a cure yet. So I think that's kind of the response that I've come up with that makes sense towards the people who are saying that everything must go back to normal and everything is a conspiracy and this is an overreach of power. I think that this is completely natural, and it happened on its own, but you do see opportunity there for governments to try some things out as far as restructuring the way that certain things are done. And I think it's going to be different moving forward, and maybe in some ways it might even improve.
It's hard to say. I mean, we can see. This is going to be the thing that worries me is that I can see. Well, one of the things that worries me is that already on your phone you have a health app, which is essentially contains some personal data. You're essentially a cyborg already in the sense that you have your phone all the time and you're interacting with it all the time. It's only a very small step to that health passport holding within it. Like I went to Southeast Asia a few years ago and I have this yellow book malaria passport. So imagine that within your computer, which proves your immunity or whatever else, like a biometric diagnostic health passport, but also because it's on your phone, then it's linked to all of your credit, all your search history. It's basically under the skin surveillance, and it also has your DNA. So then that will be linked to your earning potential, your social media. And at what you may be looking at is a cashless society where very quickly dissent on some level can just have you turned off from your the economics of modern society. And that's not like Black Mirror. That's they're already doing social currency system in China now. The point may be that future, that eventuality is further down the line than we thought, and that the sexy endgame theory of this viral, what the virus may bring is maybe only 10, 15, 20% of that invasiveness. But it's slowly encroaching. It's clear for me. It's clear. The potentiality is clear. But to believe that all, like say in Europe, all 30 odd member states are all in on the same pursuit and the same goal. I mean, if anything, what's happening is a catastrophe for globalism on some level, because all this will do is reinforce the strength of the nation state, because all across, especially Southern Europe, Spain, Italy, all these kind of countries, France as well, they're not going to want to give up sovereignty. And nothing like a pandemic to prove that you need your borders. and be able to like what Switzerland did or whatever, you know, nothing like a pandemic. And I noticed the no borders people are very quiet.
Oh yeah. I haven't heard
during the
anything
pandemic.
from them. I haven't heard anything from the toxic masculinity brigade. I haven't heard anything from the anti-vaxxers. And, you know, it just kind of just proves like what's important when it comes down to this. And I feel like a lot of that has to do with the fact that we've had it pretty easy for a long time.
For sure.
You know, it's been over a decade of economic prosperity. Most people living in the modern world haven't really ever had to deal with the potentiality of scarcity or not having enough, or competition to the point where you might not have what you need because somebody else scooped it all up. And so it's kind of like what you were saying with it's obvious that globalism isn't fit for this kind of catastrophe that we're kind of facing, because especially for us in our relationship with Canada, with Canada's relationship with America, they basically supply everything for us, you know. And we were looking at with Trump, you know, it inevitably ended up getting shut down, but he wasn't going to send us medical supplies that we needed up here. You know, we've got most of our food is being transported up here. You know, it's very, I think that's the thing that worries me most, is that is this lack of self-reliance, both on a national scale as well as a individual scale. You know, it's interesting, and like you were kind of saying with the phone, we're so tapped into these structures that basically dictate how much we get and where we get it from. And that makes people very vulnerable.
Oh, totally.
Especially in something like this.
Oh, well, I mean, think about it like this. Also, let's say you have, every time you use the tube or the train, you scan something, you know, the little doors open or whatever, and you get the train into the center. Let's just say, for argument's sake, the city center is out of bounds for gathering. And therefore, you have to scan your phone, which includes your biometric passport, over some you know, like sort of suburban train station style you know, inlets or whatever you want to call them, not inlets, whatever the word, turnstiles. You think it's my 1970s fucking childhood. And what that will do is, with that, like, let's just say people, because people are, the way our minds are in the Western mindset, we're thinking about when is sport going to come back, that kind of thing. But what if without immunity, you're no longer allowed to gather politically? So there's no more Women's March, there's no May Day festival, there's no right left marches, there's no, that aren't sanctioned by immunity. And those are linked to this biometric passport. And therefore, if you do march, your living is taken away by virtue of this. You know, you see, people, I think that I agree with you in that so many of the parameters of this conversation are structured around, I totally agree with you, an indulged Western middle-class mindset, which has never really had to struggle. I mean, the last time was maybe the Balkan Wars in the early, like 92, 93. Europe's had a pretty good run from 92. Okay, the crash in 2008, fair enough. But, you know, Ireland, a country that was dirt poor in 1975 and 1985, bounced back from that reasonably well. You know, reasonably affluent Western society again in a very short space of time. It just sort of recovered and bounced back. But if you think about, like, I totally agree with you that the parameters of this discussion are ones that are demarked by a level of indulgence and compliance that of never having really had to struggle, you know. This is a rather meandering answer, but I think that if we are looking at tens of millions of people unemployed, all looking for universal basic income, you know, again, the juxtaposition of angry young men on street corners with no work, taking money from the state, but then that money is on the proviso of not dissenting. I mean, what I would say to my friends who are really, as I say in the Endgame manifesto or whatever, that even the highest walls of your gated community can be stormed, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And what probably protects some elements of Europe is that these are democratic societies. It's not Iran.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the same things. Really, again, I have a very big problem with people who believe the end game is civil unrest. It's like they think that that's what they want, you know? Like, who's they? I don't know.
I think that's what the people that that believe this is going to happen want to believe.
I agree with you, and because
a lot of people want that to happen.
Yeah, people who are catastrophists and fatalists, and they want this to happen almost out for pure dramatic purposes. It's an emotional investment in. It's kind of like doing the lottery every day, and then somebody going, "Hey, you realize that's whatever 20 million to one. There's no point doing it." Oh, but you still want to do the lottery? No, that's a bad example. It's a bad example. No, but it's like
I think it's like this pent up frustration that people have with I guess the standard of living maybe that they've had to keep up with. And, you know, a lot of people will complain, well, you know, a lot of people are struggling right now. But a lot of people don't want to fucking go to work. A lot of people don't like their job.
Well, that's true. Yeah. This is like an extended summer holiday for some people, and they don't want to go back, and they're like, oh, I thought I was going to sort my life out. And then like, oh, all I did was watch Netflix and eat pizza. And
it's been 2 months, and I know people that are still doing that. And it's going to be really hard, I think, to send, you know, 50% of the population back to work when they haven't had to work for 2 or 3 months. Like, some people are really angry that they have to be stuck at home. Some people are fucking loving it.
Yeah.
And they are getting support from the government here in Canada. And, you know, $2,000 a month isn't a lot of money, but it's enough money if you're used to only making $15 an hour.
Yeah, for sure. This is the conundrum. And I mean, there are plenty of people who are going to lose their jobs. And one thing, I mean, tens of millions of them, I imagine. But the other thing about this is people compare this to the Great Depression in the 20s, which I understand. But even compared to, like, say, 2008, this is not a banking crisis. So there is, from what I understand, I'm not, you know, an economist or anything, but there is liquidity there to solve some of these problems when it comes to small businesses and that kind of thing. But it's not a run on the banks. You know, but what I was saying to some of these people is that, like, look, even I said to them, economically, like, do you really think that, like, they want gated communities while the whole rest of the world is Mad Max? I don't think they want that. And if so, like, I mean, that cannot be the end game, so to speak. I mean, because it economically doesn't make any sense. Where is tourism? Where is, you need people to grow and move food, to have food, and all these kind of, I think even the highest walls of any gated community can be scaled. And that's metaphorically speaking. I just don't see war as it can be something that just happens, kind of like a byproduct, but I don't believe it's the
inevitability of the like you were saying, the catastrophists that really see this as you know, the post Mad Max world. But it's really weird that that's the conclusion and the extreme that people have come to, because honestly, is that really what your personal experience is? And that's kind of what I was thinking about, was, you know, how much of that is just the panic of how much stress that we get from basically staring at the screen all day and just absorbing this and absorbing, you know, when it looks like the world is the end of the world every time that you open your phone, every time that you get up, the first thing you do is you look at your laptop or whatever notifications you have, and that can really make you start to believe, if you haven't left your fucking house this week, that it's really bad out there. But it's really not. It's really not that bad out there. And like you were saying, you've been running. You're doing things to deal with your mental state. You know, that's something that I've been focusing on. It's like, okay, well, I have limited options for the things that I can do, but I'm going to do whatever I can do, and as much of it as possible. I started running as well, and I'm fucking loving it. I couldn't run 1 kilometer without feeling like I was going to vomit before I started this. And I just did my first 10K yesterday, and it's fucking best thing I've ever done.
Yeah. I've been hitting a few 12, 13s and 14s, and every second day I've been doing that. And then the in-between days about 6. Anyway, let's not get bogged down in how much we're going to run. Because you know how much your eyes glaze over every time you watch a podcast and go, oh God, here he goes off about diet or, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I think people are more interested in the end of the world. No, but I think you're right. I think that the truth is probably an awful lot more mundane and banal than we initially, when there was some panic and there was a bit of anxiety and in the air, and obviously people are talking about the Spanish flu, they're talking about other epidemics and stuff like this, and then that kind of gives way to, at least I think for a lot of people now, sort of elements of boredom or something. Well, not boredom, but there is a kind of an idea that, like, oh right, like say for the music industry, everyone was catastrophizing. It's the end of playing gigs till now. It very well may be until the start of 2022. Who knows? Or things could just slowly open up. And then I began to think about it, is that, the economics of the situation, take a country like Ireland, where most of our money is from tourism and what pubs represent to people who come here. You think they're going to keep the pubs shut for 6 months if flights open back up? The publicans' lobby is way stronger than the health and safety lobby. I mean, for years you couldn't even breathalyze in the car park in the pub in Ireland.
Yeah.
Do you really think? And I started thinking about this thing. We were arguing about this the other day, and my friend said that, and I was like, "That's a fucking good point." So maybe my fight, which is about, or one thing I'm concerned about, which is the music industry, which I think will be the last to be let out, so to speak. But he just said to me, like, don't forget that there's fucking businessmen who need to get on planes who want flight channels opened up, not just you. And they're way more powerful than you are. Is that economics will dictate that they have to start slowly opening this up as well. I mean, that's the primary thing that will break it open, other than people's mental health or whatever else,
the economy really dictates everything. If we don't have a stable economy, we don't really have anything.
No,
because everything else falls behind that. If that falls apart.
When everything needs to be made and processed and delivered, and it's very simple things. I mean, realistically, I think any country is only 4 days away from a zombie apocalypse if there's no food in the stores and stores shut. That's a totally different thing, because but for the economy to complete, I mean, I think that in many areas of major cities, we're going to be looking at 15 to 25% unemployment and stuff like this. And then we have our universal basic income kind of argument seeping into that. But I think that economic reasons will begin to trump, no pun intended, health and safety concerns, because then the death toll and the numbers are just not what were projected. No, I get caught up in people saying to me, like, oh, the death toll numbers are not what they said it was. And I said, well, maybe that's because people took precaution. But also maybe they just got it wrong because they're dealing with, we're in uncharted territory, So maybe, again, news and information changes every couple of days. So it could just be wrong.
Yeah, well, it's interesting too, because it's almost like people wanted a genocide before we did anything about it, and it's like that's not really how you deal with these things if you don't want them to become the Great Depression or the Spanish flu or all of these other things. Like, it's almost like people think that we how dare we learn from the mistakes of our past?
Well, the thing about it is I mean, how sound a comparison is it? I mean, if you look at what caused the Great Depression, I mean, which followed on from the Spanish flu at the end of the First World War, I mean, the world is so much more interconnected now, you know. There's lessons to be drawn, and then there's new information, new data, whatever. Again, I'm finding that so much of, especially in the last 5 or 10 years, as I got into my 40s and stuff, is that like so much cognitive dissonance in relation to realizing that two different, what you considered in years ago when you were a bit more angry, not angry, but committed, that diametrically opposed points of view can both be true at the same time, you know. I mean, you can say, hey, the refugee crisis was caused by XXX things, but you can also say, well, part of it is the weather. Oh, and that's not a sexy answer, so nobody wants to say that, but you can realize that there's all these different points of view or angles from which to look at any particular problem or experience.
And the answer is usually somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, the answer is always in the middle, and that's the point. I constantly argue that, but it really annoys people, because what you're trying to do then is deconstruct idealism, deconstruct absolutism, deconstruct nailing your flag to either one side in particular. If you say, I'll take a little from column A and a little from column B, and C and D and E and F, blah, 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 it just irritates everybody when you say, well, you know, just because you might be a conservative doesn't mean you can't be for gay marriage. Just because you, say, are opposed to abortion doesn't mean you can't be pro-choice. Because everyone wants everything to be lined up in very simple sides. And the fact is that the world just doesn't work like that. Neither mathematically or empirically. It just can't work like that. I mean, if you say, I always use the argument like, how did the First World War start? And then you're going to get a silence. Well, if it was that simple, you'd be able to obviously tell me that practice. There's tens of thousands of books that all handle different angles. Now, we can say it was Gabriela Princip pulling that, you know, pulling the trigger in Sarajevo, and, you know, but he only got to do that because the car came back around the hill and the engine stalled after he threw a bomb the first time and didn't get arrested, blah, blah, blah. The one unforeseen rule, one unforeseen act of chance can dismantle any structure of probability, in my opinion. And so therefore, the submitting to the fact that, as you say, it can be all of these points between 2 points, but that's not a sexy answer. And it doesn't have the juicy tagline that everybody wants because they're stuck in front of their screen all the time.
Because nobody gets to be right. Nobody wins. Nobody gets to win. Yeah, you're totally right. It's just, very often it's about winning. You know, it's just about like, it's not about, I think that one of the greatest things about, say, for example, Enlightenment thinking, European Enlightenment thinking, was the idea of rational observation to reach consensus. And the idea of consensus is born from those times, and it's something we've completely forgotten. The idea that I explain to you my position from one side of the spectrum and you explain yours, and for the good of the commons, or whatever you want to say, we reach consensus in the middle. Nobody wants to do that anymore. Everybody just wants to win. And whether that's logical or not, because I think that what we've done now is we've turned objects of reason into articles of faith. But once somebody has an article of faith, you can't disabuse them of that. There's no point in arguing with them. We know this from arguing with people who are very religious, or that's part of one of the many of the arguments. Like, you can't disabuse somebody or convince them that there aren't 100 genders, for example, if that's part of their religion. That's something I talked about a couple months ago. Actually, I think I wrote a blog on it, and it was exactly that. It's like we've basically become religious about all of our not all, because there are reasonable conversations like this happening in podcasts that are coming out where people are like, well, maybe we should get back to listening to the other side. But yeah, it's when it's a faith, that's when it becomes a problem. when you can't learn anything from the other side. But we used to be a little bit better in society, especially like you were saying with the politics, with the left and the right thing. Like those two sides of the spectrum used to need each other, and they used to balance each other out so that society could function fairly reasonably and in a stable manner, versus having extremes and this and that.
Yeah.
But now it's only extremes, and then generally the people somewhere in the middle are kind of almost following into like the classical liberal territory, because the extremes have gone so far in either direction. And it's almost becoming like that with everything. And even everything you see online in every stage of this pandemic, from the beginning to now opening things up, every response and reaction is the only emotion and the only projection of what's being put out there seems to be outrage. It doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah. It's very complicated. I mean, I like this. What is this TV show where you have Gore Vidal debating? Oh, I can't remember his name. I shouldn't have started that unless the train of thought on that side. Anyway, it is true. We just can't. The idea of having. What am I trying to say? I think it's become like this. Okay. So if we take it mathematically, I think that modern societal politics is, we can graph it on a graph of 1 to 9, right? 5 being the center, 1 being the far left, 9 being the far right. I think the reality is there's very few 8s and 9s. There really isn't. Mm-hmm. But you're allowed by modern society to be a 1 or a 2. Right. Despite, for example, arguing with somebody the other week about China, and I said, in the Great Leap Forward, it's the same political party that caused that. What's the Great Leap Forward? Okay, I see. So the point is that the 1 and the 2s and the 3s call the 4, 5, 6s, 7, 8, 9s. And they destroy. So they call the middle ground the far right, when in fact it's the center. And the center is consensus. The center is where I don't want to live in a state run by 1 or 9. Mm-hmm. So most people reach consensus of 4, 5, 6, but it's the 1, 2, 3s who are obviously identitarians or whatever you want to call it, who are busy calling the middle and therefore gutting society of any ability
to reason,
to reach consensus. Mm-hmm. While the people who are 8 and 9s just stay quiet and watch and observe and convince everybody that they're 5 or 6s. So this is my mathematical way of looking at it. And while most people are actually 5 and they move a little bit to the left and the right about certain issues, they're 4, 5, 6s. While even our social media intake, our social media, the absorption of the people that of YouTubers is that we cede ground to the people with the loud hailer. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the only people anybody listens to are the people from either side who are shouting the loudest.
They've disproportionately taken over the landscape, even if it's a small percentage of what the general population think. Most, like you were saying, most people are around a 5 or 6, somewhere around there. But we've just given the stage to the most unreasonable on both sides. They're the ones who are having the dialogue. And that's why I started this podcast, was because I was like, no, it's like they're not the only ones that get to be part of the conversation.
And exactly that. And it's, I keep trying to tell people who are 1 and 2s and 3s, about the history of the thing they profess to be part of as a 1, which is responsible for hundreds of millions of deaths, that maybe they just go, that doesn't fit my agenda. But also to tell them, like, if you keep, nobody wins by just screaming at somebody. You don't get to speak. All you do is move people to the other side. Mm-hmm. And if you want to create enemies, then keep on going as you're going. Because for I'm pretty relatively reasonable. If you're going to move, if you're not even going to speak to me, then imagine the people that even further to whatever place you don't want to speak to. Imagine where you're pushing them, and this is we've ceded ground to, you can see this on 24-hour news channels where they go, look what Twitter are talking about. listen, 2 or 4% of Twitter sends 80% of its tweets. It's not a cross-section of society. It's not a cross-section of society at all. Go to a working area of Dublin and ask them, what are your concerns? And they will tell you. Healthcare, housing, education, the original concerns of the actual old left, for example. And most people's concerns once they have kids. I think for some of this is because many of the people with the loud hailers don't have children yet, which is the Western disease, you know?
They don't have to be accountable for anybody.
No, they don't.
And that's a big part of it, right? You don't have a family, you don't have secure relationships or marriages or partners or these other sort of structures where you don't just get to, what's the word? You don't just get to be fanatic about everything because other people get dragged through it.
Yeah, I mean, and it's complex because you can plot the graph through the last 100, 120 years as we moved from a society that didn't just take what it needed, but what it wanted, all the way through to this 1960s counterculture, which in the birth of, let's say, post-Second World War birth of the idea of youth and what it represented, our spending power, the Industrial Revolution. Like, you can plot all these graphs, and I'm not a person who is going to shout at somebody in their teens who tells me that I'm wrong, because I think that being a young person right now, if my failings at even getting to grips with 12 different platforms, at 44 years old, who has a reasonable grasp of his mental health, fuck knows what it does to somebody who's 15 or 16 or 17. So I've moved to become more understanding of the problems of being young. Imagine being 17 now and your entire life has been documented online without your consent, from your baby pictures till now. My God, how you'd be bullied in school. I would long for the old days when you called somebody out and got a thump in the head in the yard or whatever, you know.
And then it was over. Yeah.
And then it was over.
And the other thing is too, you're competing with so much, especially, you know, like we're both coming from, you know, musical backgrounds and especially, you know, extreme metal and alternative music. And I think naturally you question the powers that be when you start to get interested in the bands, because these are the people that are kind of telling you something you've been hoping to hear. But we used to only really have to object to our parents and our teachers. Now these kids that are coming up have to compete with all of this other information that's being put out there. Like, how do you choose? It's like, there's a lot to be angry about, especially with so many different sources providing you with fuel and confusion and anxiety, you know?
Yeah. And I think it's also, as adults, we've ceded the debate floor to teenagers. We've allowed our politics to be dominated by the whims of teenagers. And look, I was a teenager, you were a teenager, and I was a fucking dickhead because I was a teenager. You're growing, you're full of hormones, you're raging full of hormones. You don't really understand the world. I mean, I'm not going to listen to somebody telling me how the world should be from somebody who's never traveled it or fucking paid rent. You don't get to tell the world how to be when you're 18. You don't get to try and make the civil institutions of the state, bow to your whim. We shouldn't have the UN being lectured by a 15-year-old. It's the infantilism of modern society of the West, you know? And it's because the adults left the room. They ceded, because let's be honest, the way modern social media and technology is, an 11 or 12-year-old or 13-year-old can have more followers than a politician and can have more influence. Let's say an Instagram influencer with hundreds of thousands of people who goes like, I don't believe in vaccines. Like that has more impact than a politician or a doctor trying to go online to tell people vaccinate your kids because blah, 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 blah. Like, we got the society we deserved by prizing stupidity, banality,
aesthetics over competence, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't blame young people for the complications that they're having. You know, it can't be easy to be 15. I mean, like, I have cousins who are 15, and just sitting down with them trying to get around their headspace for even an hour when you get the time, is like, what the fuck? It's boggling.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the connections they make between things that you just made as common sense when you were 15, or their understanding of the prism of the world. And then you go, like, yeah, but you're in college in a rich European state. I don't really think you can claim that this is a state of, fascist
You don't get to talk about oppression. Yeah, you don't get to talk about oppression at an Ivy League school.
No, you don't. And you certainly don't get to lecture the whole world about it, especially when you haven't traveled it. I sat down with a kid in California who saw me with a black male shirt, and he said, what we need is a Marxist revolution in the United States. And I said, right, okay, so like a Bolshevik revolution. He said, yeah. I said, yeah, but do you know how many guns are in the United States, right? Yeah, but I said, listen, man, I've been in Russia and Belarus. I've been in Cambodia. I've seen the killing fields. I've been at year zero. In fact, I've been, for years toured Eastern Europe. And I said, should try this rhetoric. And then it's turned out he'd never left America. And I said, it's very easy to wave that flag and be angry in such a way in a state that's provided you literally with your entire welfare. I get it, you want to tear it down, but you should be mindful of the thing that you're proclaiming as the answer. Because, in Cambodia between 1975 and 1979, they killed, 2.5 million people. They were murdering people with glasses in the streets. I said, is that? And he's just like, no, that's not really what I'm talking about. So, yeah, but it is. It is what you're talking about. I get it. You're grandstanding to me because you've seen a dude covered in tattoos in the bar, and you want it to be,
we have 100 million corpses that tells us that isn't the best way for us to structure society.
No, and I mean, I would have the same conversation with somebody who told me from the other side. Like, really, you need to try and understand a little bit more of what history should teach you. But I think it's part of it is that it's the level of egotism and narcissism that social media implants within us, especially young people who are developmental and susceptible. The idea that everything you say has meaning, and every single opinion should be shared, and if not validated by your peers, then again, this appeals to this narcissistic, selfish urge we have as human monkeys, and it brings out the worst in people. But like I said, adults have ceded the room to 15-year-olds and 18-year-olds. And I mean, like, for every confused teenager about their sexuality and gender, that was kids in 1986 as well. They just liked fucking the Smiths and the Cure, and they figured it out by the time they were 18. But everybody wants everything to be instant. I want my problem sorted now, and I want the world to bend to that whim. Look, when I was a teenager in 1988 and 89, and in a country like Ireland, which had a long history of emigration and oppression by the Catholic Church and this, that, and the other, and a long struggle of women trying to get healthcare and contraception. And I mean, it's dark 20th century stuff, really dark stuff. But you were still a confused teenager at 15, but you didn't think that you had the right to lecture society,
Go about restructuring or go about tearing down all of the complex structures of the world when you don't have a solution for it, right?
No, and I mean, look, it's the thing about it is, as I said to a friend of mine, we're discussing anarchy. I said, anarchy based on, this is a utopian ideal which is at the heart of the very, very far left, the destruction of all power structures. And I just sort of said, well, I'm fucking 6 inches taller than you. What if I just take what you have? Well, you wouldn't do that in a communal sharing. I said, okay, but the law of the claw, I think, is always going to dictate human nature on those terms, because I said, who puts food on the shelves? I mean, it's fine if you're going to live in a commune of 50, 100, a few hundred people. But 1.2 million people live in Dublin. And you're going to tell me that the working class in Dublin are going to be like lectured to by a middle class art student who tells them, debates the meaning of anarchy with them when they can't feed their kids? They're going to destroy the fucking place.
Yeah.
They're going to be fucking taking the fucking roofs off fucking buildings. And do you know what I mean? It's just, it's just such a indulged middle-class perspective on all of this, you know, that isn't tempered with any reality. I get it as an ideal. It's interesting to bat about in the debating circle. And you can take elements of it and try and apply it. And we've all should try and take elements to be better towards each other. And just because you may oppose those fundamentally doesn't mean you can't reach consensus, or that you somehow are a corporate shill of a kind of like a you know, a sort of a corporate shill, because you say the opposite thing, you know, again, consensus and whatever, you know. I'm sure I've said enough to get myself into lots of trouble by now.
Well, that's kind of the beauty of podcasting, right? It's like, I like this. I like that you can have this long form kind of uncensored discussion, as long as you can manage to do it without getting yourself deplatformed, because then the message gets lost. But yeah, it's kind of like, it's weird because it's like, you know, I know where they're coming from, but at the same time, I also don't have context with the reality that they're living in this kind of, you know, I couldn't imagine growing up, like you said, on the internet. But it's like, I used to think that the answer was to just tear everything down because all of these structures were corrupt. But I see the potential outcome of tearing all these things down. And I don't want to see everything fall apart, right? Because we, even just on this smallest scale, we see the result of that. You know, it's like people don't know how to deal with that kind of chaos. You know, it's like you look at them, not to talk shit about them, because, you know, I feel for people that experience this kind of anxiety and panic and don't really understand adversity as well. But you look at the toilet paper shoppers, it's like, that is such a small thing, but it's such a huge sign of how unprepared and how emotionally and even just with our own sort of personal competence when it comes to approaching these kinds of bigger challenges. It's like, I would never think in my head that the first thing I need to do is make sure that I'm wiping my ass well when I can't feed my kids. You know, it's such a disconnect from, you know, the source of, you know, where we get our food from and all these other things, right?
But I will say something about that. I think that the toilet roll thing, if you really look at what, if you look at what that is, this sounds really pedantic, but toilet roll takes up a lot of space on the shelves. It's not a tin of beans or a tin of tuna. It's a reasonably big thing, which you have to carry around, and therefore the optical of empty shelves of toilet roll, maybe there's only as many sold as tins of beans, but the optics of huge empty shelves and people carrying it
very dramatic.
It's very dramatic, and it's very good for social media. So I do wonder, I'd like to see the statistics of toilet rolls sold compared to tins of beans. Do you know what I mean? So I think there's a kind of diffuse backstory optically behind that, which maybe if you consider it, you go, okay, this is a bulky item, a bulky product. Maybe
it represents scarcity more so than like you said, 2 square feet of shelf space.
But that's just my nature to try and take the sexy out of every argument. To kind of go, oh yeah, maybe there's a more banal truth to that, you know?
Yeah.
That's sort of, or a gray truth, you know?
But that's a really good approach, you know, because it's like that. Not only does that relieves you yourself of a lot of the panic and anxiety that these other people are experiencing, because you can look at this subjectively.
I don't feel I'm not a particularly panicked or anxious person. I'm usually I try and be stoically analytical about things and unemotional about the way I view things. Much, you know, if you spoke to anybody who knew me well, they'd say sometimes to my detriment, but I try and be, to analyze the circumstance from a couple of different angles, but also try and appreciate the backstory. And I most definitely try and apply some sort of stoic logic to it. I know that's a kind of like a buzzword at the last year or two. Just because somebody put fucking Marcus Aurelius fucking
meme and shared it 10 billion times.
Yeah.
When really he was kind of like a pretty like he wasn't this like fuck yeah tough guy that kind of Stoicism has been turned into. He was a peaceful character who
and not the most physical by all accounts. It's trying to not be emotionally driven by or persuaded emotionally by an argument that doesn't appeal to my sort of reasoned nature. I try and divorce myself from that. And the older I get, the easier it gets, that's for sure. So that's kind of, but it's, it seems like every white male now has a podcast. It's true, isn't it?
It is. Yeah.
Everyone has a podcast.
Yeah, everyone. It's because everyone has an opinion that they feel needs to be shared, and myself included. But yeah, I was listening to your podcast last night, and it's.
Oh yeah.
I commend you for starting with the monologue route, because that just seems so difficult for me. I started this podcast actually out of my own awareness of how poor I am at articulating myself when it comes to candid conversations. I can write my thoughts down and, sound like fucking Shakespeare when I have a pen to paper, but my bumbling conversation skills have improved a lot since I started getting to do this. And like, not only just my speaking skills, but my listening skills have allowed me to learn so much, because I'm not looking for my next opportunity to speak, jack myself off, basically.
It's difficult. It's difficult because many people do that, and I mean, I've been to blame for that, and over the years, as many other people. I think that the monologue thing is, I find I have to be like in the zone, in the humor. Really like, okay, I'm in, not tired, I need to be fully firing on all cylinders, or else I just find myself daydreaming off, because it's the way modern society is. It's very hard to concentrate on just speaking off the cuff for 20 or 30 or 40 minutes anymore. But when I hit that, the groove, then I find that I can talk. I could just speak for 20, 30 minutes off the top of my head, but it's hard in a room on your own. I understand now.
You don't have anything to bounce ideas off, or any frame of reference to inspire like new thought and things like that. Like when I sit here and I just try and speak, I'm like, oh my God, like I have a potato for a brain. It's like I don't have anything to say. But then I get into a conversation with you, and I'm like, yeah, that's interesting to me, and I've thought about that, and this takes me in another direction. So it is a skill to be able to sit there and speak eloquently about with only your thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, when I'm doing the podcast, I will make a sheet of like prompt words, like I would have done when I was in college or something like this. But sometimes I'll just deviate off the script. But I have a few ideas of things, and then I'll just sort of try and riff on them. And you have to be cognizant of the fact that at least some people listening to the podcast, are fascinated by an Irish accent to begin with. And so first of all, I started to want to get rid of all the and all the Irishisms, and then I went, no, you know what? That's just the way you speak. You don't need to fucking try and edit all those out. But to get that rapid fire stream of consciousness, you really have to be in. It sounds like a cliche, but in the zone. But I suppose for me, with Primordial, from years and years and years of doing interviews, I'm quite used to speaking to people, or having someone at a festival go, yeah, tell me about your new album, and blah, 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 blah. And you can just rattle off your whatever, So I don't find that too difficult, I mean, friends of mine would say what a crashing bore that I may be, for always talking and stuff like this. But yeah, you're right. Sometimes the greater skill is actually listening to what somebody else is saying, rather than just waiting for your turn to speak.
It's like it's exactly true, and that was why I came into this this interview because I just wanted to have a conversation with somebody. I didn't want to have set questions. I didn't want to plan for an hour. And, it's because there's an element of that too, especially with the sort of the set questions and that kind of style of interviewing is you miss a lot. You don't,
sure.
you have to go back and go through the conversations that you've had. And I usually do that anyways, just so I can see where I can improve, but you don't get to be fully immersed in the conversation,
No,
when it's edited and what's the word? Scripted to some degree. I think particular guests, like I will research and stuff like that, but you and I having this common passion for music and politics and art, it's so easy to have an interesting conversation, right?
Yeah, and I mean, you have to be aware. I mean, I've been mindful of, there's an element where you have to play the game a tiny bit to try and gain some traction. I mean, doing a podcast to no one, like just shouting in an empty room, is particularly unrewarding. I mean, it may have some sort of cathartic qualities, but at the same time, you do need some tractions for it to be upwardly mobile, to have people listening to it. So I'm perfectly aware. I had an argument today about a phrase I put into a podcast that should be out at the weekend. That could be taken the wrong way. It's me being silly, but part of it was, I said, like, look, this is part of the character that's being imbued into the podcast. If I just said, sure, look at it, it'll be grand, nobody would listen to that. Yeah, again, moderate man says reasonable thing isn't always the best sell. So you have to lean a little bit into sometimes being a bit of a cunt, or being a bit opinionated, or poking, or trying to wrangle a standpoint or a point of view out of things. And that's some part of it is, I had to learn about the podcast thing, is to not be so fucking precious. Like, there are stories in the podcast that are about drugs, that are about touring, that are about me being a fucking idiot, traveling the world, and loads more. My friend said to me, don't shoot all your loads in the first 10 podcasts, but all your best stories. Oh yeah, good point. Never thought about that. She goes, yeah, if you're going to do like 50 of them, and then episode 1 is the classic, well then,
or 2000, like Joe Rogan.
Yeah, then you're like every fucking classic death metal album band ever that just made one classic album when they were 19. But so she just said, like, don't do that, but also, look, these aren't songs, they're just stories, they're yarns. And if you're, there's an Irish quality, I know it's a cliche, to telling a yarn, to telling a story, that you try not let all of the details get in the way of. And I think that's a quality, but also to not be too fucking precious about your own identity, to poke fun at yourself, to to kind of put some gallows humor in it. And that's what I wanted to inject into just doing a podcast. And for the most part, I think generally people have appreciated it. I've realized my lane is not going to be maybe in the mainstream, so to speak, but
you never know what people are interested in, though, right? That's why I think it's important to just put the ideas out there, and you don't have to always think of, well, are these people going to like this? Are those people going to like this? It's subjective, like music, right? Like there's so many different things where someone might listen to an album and there might be this little part that's imperfect, but all of the best records have mistakes on them because that's what gives them character. And I think that's the same thing with conversation. It's that sloppiness and that having to navigate through, like, feeling a person out and seeing which buttons you can push or what sort of direction. Okay, well, is that going to sort of make that person uncomfortable? So let's, it's that exploration of the imperfect sort of dialogue that makes it interesting. Otherwise, we can just listen to fucking Siri talk to us all day long.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I in relation to, let's say, saying something that's contentious, I think at least encapsulated in the argument I had today was, I said, like, said to my friend, more people probably think like me than you imagine. And this lane, which is this, I mean, most podcasts, at least in the heavy metal world, are North American. And I said, I think there's a voice for someone from Europe, a regional accent or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a voice for somebody else telling another story that's been here for a long time, etc., and has experiences that are a bit different to everybody else's. But at the same time, to understand the lane, I said to my friend, I'm not looking for a mainstream sort of... I realized that mainstream podcasting is highly unlikely. So therefore, if it's going to be some element is going to be the rough and ready rock and roll stories and all that kind of thing, then they are going to have phrases in them that are going to be offensive and things like this. And so I think as we come back to things we're talking about, is that the smaller percentage of people have decided it's upon their terms to be offended by this or that or the other, but I think like the Voltaire thing of defending the rights of those you disagree with to be able to speak is the most important thing. So I don't know. I don't want to apply too highfalutin ideas to just doing a podcast. It's in the weird circumstances we find ourselves in, being in self-isolation lockdown, I kind of feel like it's either this, go running, or go fucking mad. So here we are Friday night.
Well, that's the thing, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the whole thing about the isolation. Like my mother is a nurse, she's out there working. She sees the sick people and stuff like that. But she's also expressed to me like, how terrible it is for your immune system to be stuck at home, isolated, not having any social interaction, not getting fresh air, not exercising, not, like the emotional stress of being stuck at home doesn't help people's immune systems either. So it's really interesting to try to figure out just exactly what we're supposed to be doing,
Yeah, I mean, and I'm also sick of listening to fucking middle-class Buddhists, fucking cat moms and dog dads and stuff telling me to look inside myself and fuck off. This is not like some sort of fucking Mariah Carey lyric or something, really, really fucking tired of, okay, I get it. Recipes and yoga and whatever.
Stay safe.
I don't mind that. I don't mind that. But I got like on Monday or just end of last week, beginning of this week, I said I am so full of fucking aggression and testosterone, and that would have been Monday was my sports day, playing football, always in the rain, clattering into people, fucking tackling, playing football. And I realized what it is. It's not just it's competition, but it's also people relying on you. A team of people pulling together, relying is very good for your mental health because it teaches you the importance of responsibility, of just making a fucking effort. And I realized, okay, I'm out running, this is discipline, but I have nobody relying on me to do anything. It's all, even running is in isolation.
Yeah, there's no cooperation required when you're by yourself.
No, there's none. And I thought to myself, it's not just testosterone and aggression, which it is. And I said, this is why we rehearse. This is why Saturday night might have the odd whiff of brimstone about it, because you need to have a bit of siphon some of that energy off somewhere when there's nowhere to go. And so part of me was just like, this sort of placid obedience of just accepting everything as it comes with this sort of vaguely Buddhist kind of like, just do yoga and bake some ciabattas or something.
Do puzzles for fucking 8 hours a day.
Yeah, it's just such a white middle class way of trying to deal with this, deal with what's happening. I'm not asking for people to be racked by existential guilt or something like this, but and also I would not acknowledge the fact that I was being entirely unreasonable as well. Because that's part of what it is, the part of what it is like, I'm being a bit of a cunt right now, but it just happens, so.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Yeah. But you need that to be able to kind of bounce your energy off other people and other people to be able to absorb your energy. Because a lot of the time that fuels other people. And then you also are releasing a lot of that as well. So, it's really kind of interesting. There's kind of, with this sort of lack of social interaction thing, it's a great time for podcasting. I get to talk to all kinds of fucking cool people I wouldn't be talking to if I was outside doing other things. But yeah, it's just, there's almost kind of like this sort of looming, at least for myself, there's a physical release that doesn't happen, that has to happen in order for me to kind of stay level-headed with
I
so
totally
much
agree with you.
inactivity, you know, especially
Yeah.
when you're active and healthy. You know, your body craves that release even more because you have so much more energy and vitality, right? So it has to go somewhere.
Yeah.
So, Alan, for us as musicians, you know, this is kind of the last thing I wanted to talk about, obviously, because there's a lot of people that are going to be listening to this that want to hear something from you about what the future might look like, or what you think the future might look like for touring bands and touring artists.
It's really, really difficult to say. Again, maybe coming back to something I was going to say earlier, is that the economics of the situation might trump health and safety, so to speak. But at the same time, touring Europe, for example, we're talking about entry into all these different countries which are running at different speeds. They're going to have different requirements. I mean, before we even get into the idea of, like, I think we can have socially distanced comedy where people sit at tables and have a routine of going to the toilet and all that kind of thing. I think that could happen. I think even maybe theater could happen.
Mm-hmm.
But music, like a packed venue full of people, I really don't know. Without immunity, without a vaccine, I think some countries are just going to not allow that.
Mm-hmm.
Some countries will. I suppose it's going to be a whole different set of rules from one country to the next. Like Spain might be different to France. How you then plot and plan a tour. But I would say that this year is probably not going to happen.
Mm-mm. Especially with potentially limited capacities, right? Like you're talking about, we could have people separated 6 feet apart at tables, but to fill a venue and have that be profitable for a band is impossible.
The only way that will happen is if you have 1,000 capacity venue, which sells 100 or 200 tickets at €200 or €300 a ticket. Mm-hmm. So it's only going to be fucking nonsense, Ed Sheeran's type bullshit for middle class people who will spend €300 on whatever nonsense that is.
It'll have to be exclusive, right, for it to be economical.
Yeah. I mean, and also, like I said, there are musicians who are loving this because they get to start their cooking channel and strum an acoustic guitar and play 80s fucking TV show themes on their guitar on Twitch. But if this isn't sorted out, I think this is like the end of rock and roll. You know, if it's going to be remote music, remote entertainment, remote gigs, and people just get used to it. The thing that worries me is that somehow people go, oh, well, they're used to this now. This is just what they like now. So let's just keep it like that. Festivals become online filmed, empty room things, remote.
Everything is live streamed. Everything,
Yeah.
Or pay-per-view concerts, things like that. Like that's not far off to believe that could happen, or at least a percentage of it could transition to that.
Oh, for sure. What I hope is that the economics of the situation just force things to return. I mean, but as for 40,000 people descending on a field in Germany from all across the world, fucking rubbing off each other and drinking and taking drugs and sleeping in tents from countries without immunity, I don't know. I mean, I book bands on festivals, and it's the booking world is about to collapse. Tons of venues are about to close. Booking agents are about to go bust. As a musician who makes, probably more than half of his yearly income from playing live, maybe more, it's a disaster. It's a total disaster. And all I see and hear and whatever on the mainstream media is, it's always a kooky story at the end of the news. Oh, look what these kooky musicians have done. They're playing a gig in their front room and blah, blah, blah. It's like, this is for a touring musician. And it's not, I don't just count myself. There's crew people, there's lighting people, there's sound people, there's everything that's involved in every production. Not just, oh, you're just a fucking grubby heavy metal musician.
Yeah, there's people that don't have anything to sell, right? At least there are still things that we can sell. There are people that are reliant on whether or not you're able to play.
Yeah. I mean, and that includes like labels. The streaming numbers went through the floor because people are at home, but they're streaming Netflix.
Mm-hmm.
They're not streaming music because they're not commuting
mm-hmm.
to work anymore. They're not listening to music in the morning, or they're not going to work. They're listening place for music, which maybe
mm-hmm.
used to be away from the family on the way and back from somewhere, is gone.
Or at the gym, now, somewhere where they can do something active.
Exactly. So the streaming numbers hit the fucking floor. And that's why at the moment, the most successful musicians are gamers on Twitch, you know? And if that's the reality, then I don't really want a part of it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if this is life without adventure,
mm-hmm.
without happenstance, without something of the other. And if the future was okay, well, you can just be a musician, but just play in your front room, then you won't get any more music from me.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's it. It's
the drive for me was to never have to do that again. You know, yeah. to have to be, you know, playing in my shitty covers in my living room, playing them poorly. The goal has always been to progress and be good enough that someone might show up to hear it, right?
Yeah, but it's also human. It's human stuff. It's you know, it's going out to see a band, a social experience with other people. Mm-hmm. It's the communality of, let's call it, a vaguely religious experience, which is going to see something you love, whether it's going to see, I don't know, Nick
mm-hmm.
Cave or something, and hearing, you know, Push the Sky Away or something, you know, and this whole human interaction is just, this is what's being removed. And
mm-hmm.
for kids who grow up just looking at Fortnite, maybe it's not such a big deal.
Mm-hmm. But it's an exchange of energy that you miss, right? Because, you know, the band gets to receive the love from the
sure.
people that want to come see their music. And then in turn, you provide them with all of that effort and energy that goes into performing.
Yeah. I mean, people have said to me, oh, you know, you lose this, that amount of money. And I said to them, well, look, here's the other story is this. A year ago, I was in South America. We played in South America. And I was on my way to Easter Island because I just went from Chile to Easter Island. To me, that's, you know, life, living, adventure.
Mm-hmm.
If life is just these 14 streets I run around every day and looking at a screen, yeah, well, I'm just, you know, over it.
Exactly.
Or that's not living. It's just surviving. You know.
Yeah, you lose your ability to experience the world, and then like you said, there's not really that much to look forward to.
No, there isn't anything to look forward to. And I mean, it's you know, I'm not fucking stupid. We're not surviving. It's not like surviving the Blitz or something. I get it. You know,
mm-hmm.
it's, you know, I get it. You know, we're not Ukrainian peasants in the famine or whatever.
Yeah.
No problem. I hold my hand and go, yeah, what my grandparents did during the Second World War is, you know, as English teenagers going off to fight the Second World War. Yeah, I get it. No problem. Historical perspective. Fine. But at the same time, this is a new test, which is just, life in front of a screen. Mm-hmm. And as if you're a musician and a touring musician or somebody who's used to traveling, then this is your new. Mm-hmm. If this is the new reality, then I think I need to have I think I just need to have a different, something else to add to my CV, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because it's remote living, it to me isn't really living, you know? Anyway.
Mm-hmm. Well, Alan, I know you got somewhere to be, so I appreciate you coming on and talking to me.
Yeah, the fucking the shop on the parallel street, nowhere exciting or nothing, you know? I'm going out to stock up on toilet roll and tins of beans, man, you know?
Life of a famous rock star. In
That's exactly
2020.
What it is, yeah.
Well, thanks for coming on. Appreciate you talking to me, and looking forward to having some more conversations like this in the future.
No problem, man. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Barbaric Wisdom. I'm Bronson Lee Norton. If you've been enjoying the podcast so far, be sure to subscribe to stay updated on the latest episodes. If you would like to show your support and help us continue to be able to bring your favorite guests onto the show, head on over to www.patreon.com/Barbaric Wisdom. That's www.patreon.com/Barbaric Wisdom.